So this is a 1946 Ford, I think it's called 1-Ton Express. And this is something that my father purchased back, I think, in the 60s. I believe he was the second owner. And the green truck next to it, the Jimmy, which I already have a couple of videos on that one, ended up replacing it as a farm truck. But this thing has sat around for as long as I can remember, and I have never heard it run. I've been trying to get this thing to run for a long time now and never have been able to do that. So I hope to do that in this video series. I actually have the original invoice here from July 20th, 1946. And the story that I'm told is that this was the first truck to come to the little town of Farmersville, Texas after World War II. And there was somebody that ordered it, and then he got it. It had the 6-cylinder instead of the V8, and he didn't want it, so somebody else bought it and then used it on the farm, and my father later bought it from him. But I was curious about these numbers on here because we have, the truck, we have freight, which now would be delivery charge, gas and oil, and of course taxes. I translated that to today's money using CPI calculator, and we have a very affordable truck. Now, granted, this thing was absolutely no frills. Here's the interior. Now, excuse the tractor part and garbage bags. I don't know where they came from, but here's a better view. I mean, this is bare bones. We got the windows that always work. We have, it's a standard transmission, just 6-cylinder engine. Really nothing on here. I don't even know if this thing even has a heater. So a couple of things about the interior that we actually have coming back is this push to start button, which this had way back in the day, and then it disappeared for a while, and now we have it again. And another interesting piece on this is this switch right here is actually the ignition switch. And there's a key there on the other side of that, where if this thing is locked, it actually has a piece that comes in here and locks the steering column, which, we won't see that until way later on. So here's a look at the engine. This is a flathead 6-cylinder, and like I said earlier, I have never heard this thing run. It had been sitting out in the yard since I was a kid, and I've multiple times tried to get it to run. Back in the late 90s, well, I guess it's probably mid-90s, my dad took it to a mechanic, and he got it to run a little bit, but I wasn't there. I didn't hear it, and even whenever we got it back home, it still wouldn't run. So I asked my dad if he had a nickname for this, like we have for the Jimmy, and he didn't. Asked some other people in the family, and they didn't know anything about it either. So I'm going to call this the Nemesis. And I say that because of all the vehicles we've had that I've worked on, this is the only one that still, as yet, eludes me. I tried again to work on this back in 2014, and as you can see here, the distributor is right here in the fan. So trying to adjust that, clean out the points, get it to fire, just ended up being a nightmare. And then eventually it sat a few more years later to the point to where the starter, which is right here, which I just took on with a jumper cable to a battery, got to where it would just froze up. It wouldn't do anything. And at that point, I decided, well, the best course of action would be to pull it into the shop. So we were able to get this thing pulled out from its its parking spot. It wasn't quite buried in a hole like the Jimmy was. And everything moved. All the wheels moved. Didn't have any stuck brakes or anything. We managed to get it in the shop, and I ended up taking the hood off of it here. And we had the tire there on the front because we actually had to push it back into the shop with the tractor, and I didn't want to dent that front end any more than it already was. I ended up taking the entire front clip off so that I could work on the engine. And as we can see, there's the front of that distributor with kind of the squid wires and everything that go back along this tube, which is a nightmare to have to fish through. And the main issue that we were running into was, of course, that starter not working. And, this is the driver's side, kind of a better view of everything there. But the starter plugged here back into this bell housing, which is where the clutch is, and it's actually the lowest part in the drivetrain there. And the starter, as we can see, was completely rusted. This thing is supposed to, whenever the starter spins up, this spring throws the gear into the flywheel, because the flywheel would be right here. It engages it, and then as soon as the engine starts, it'll flick it back and move it out of the way. But that entire everything around there was rusted up. I did take the head off, and we've got a bunch of carbon in there, and then I even in this picture here, you can see that this valve is open, and that one looks like it's trying to be open. I took the manifolds and carburetor off, took off the fuel pump, got all this thing ready to basically get out of the truck. I have I guess these are called inspection ports off. These are the valve springs. Remarkable amount of sludge in there, and I'll get to that at another video. Here's the flywheel, and the starter would plug in right here. At this point, I've got almost everything out of there. The wood is there to kind of prop up the engine from where I took the screws out of the motor mounts. I opted to take out the entire engine and transmission all in one go. So once we got that done, here's what it looked like. And then I had this engine out with the transmission attached to it, and it took such a long time to get the transmission disconnected from the engine. And whenever I finally did, I saw why the starter was locked up. Here's what's left of the clutch. All of this is rust. This entire bottom bell housing was full of water. Just how it was sitting there. My guess is that rain came in, through the cab or somewhere in the engine, and it just pooled down here. I didn't really see any in the crankcase, but there where the clutch is completely destroyed. And then after removing the bell housing, we can see, like, this is the back of the oil pan. All of this is rusted and corroded where water was just sitting in here. So I've got the engine out and connected to the engine stand. And what's interesting is that this oil drain plug, I guess, the reason this mouth of this is so big is there is actually kind of a screen in there. Not really a filter, because it did have a external filter, but I guess it was kind of like a pickup screen or whatever. So I have the oil pan removed, and this gear here, this is the oil pump. This is the pickup tube, and it goes this cup here, and this actually sits in a screened-in basket that is formed by the drain plug. And you can see where, you know, all of this is kind of sludge. We still have a little bit of liquid oil here, but yeah, now I'm kind of glad this thing never actually fired up, because we would have really damaged it with the lack of good oil in here. So I've got one of the front main bearings taken off, and this actually, despite what it looks like here, this actually is in pretty good shape. And you can see the camshaft down here. So I took the pistons out, and as we can see on this one, well, there used to be a ring here, and I think it exited into the combustion chamber, so that's not going to do much good. Here is, I think it's that very same piston, and we got a nice little mark in it here from whenever the ring broke off and then hit the top of the piston. Here's another one, and this one we've got a double, actually not only do we have a double ring here, we have one inserted the other way. I have no idea how this happened. Here's another one. We can see that the piston land is just totally gone here, and of course part of those rings are gone as well. And then this is kind of a close-up of the where the rod's connected here. Again, I mean, not bad. Now we do have this broken freeze plug here that's been rusted out, which I hope isn't too much of an issue. But going back and look at these pistons, one thing I forgot to mention is on this one, actually this one where it lost part of its ring, this one has extra one in there and a couple more of them, and I forgot to take photos of them, but it almost looks like part of the piston rings broke off of one piston, somehow migrated over to another combustion chamber, and then added on to the piston that was already there. That is not the way this is supposed to work. I am trying to get the valve train out of here, and there are absolutely no videos or really that many resources anywhere on this engine. Everything is focused on its cousin, the flathead V8, which this does in a lot of ways use the same valve train. The valves themselves are mushroom tipped. Let me get one that I haven't destroyed here. They have this mushroom on the end of them that engages this little clip, and that goes in there like so. And this, once you get the spring out, this actually prevents you from pulling the entire valve out, because this valve guide, this split valve guide, is all in one piece with the valve. All of this comes out at once. So you've got the spring, you've got this little retaining clip that keeps the valve guide together, and of course the valve in the guide. All of this is supposed to come out at once, and that does not happen. So here we see, here's that retaining clip, here's the spring, the retainer for that goes over the mushroom end of the valve is down here. And theoretically, what you're supposed to be able to do is use this tool here, this real heavy pry bar with a fork at the end, and you're supposed to be able to jam it in between these springs and engage this. I'm not sure if you can see that or not. There's a little indentation on that whenever these are together. So it kind of hooks into that little indentation, you're supposed to take the pry bar like this, or actually no, like this, engage it in there, push it up against that, and pull the entire valve guide, spring, everything together down enough to pull this retaining clip out. And then once that's done, there's another tool, specialty Ford tool that I can't seem to find, that you put in there, and then it kind of cranks down and it pushes the entire valve assembly up. So since I could not find that specialty part, what I've been having to do is jam the fork of this thing in between as low as I could go on the spring here. So jam that fork in, and then you can use the leverage to compress the spring. Now I tried using one of these things from like a Briggs & Stratton engine. The problem with that is these have real tiny, I don't know if you can call those teeth, but the things that grab the spring, and you know, they just tend to slip off, and you just get mad at it. So with this big tool over here, you can compress that spring, and then really once it's compressed, you can use one hand to hold that, and then get a screwdriver, a flathead, and then drive it in to kind of push. Let's see, this is on there like that. So with the spring tension removed from that, you just have to kind of push that at both ends, and then it falls off. Once you do that, once you get that spring tension off there, then the valve can actually go all the way up here until it hits the very bottom of the valve guide. I'm not sure how well you can see it in here. Let me look at this other one. So until it hits, here, let me put this over here, until it hits this bottom piece. Now, in trying to get the fork tool to engage this bottom piece here, as you can see, I've broken off the bottom of several of these. This stuff is very brittle, breaks very easily. Fortunately, I believe all of this can be replaced. So basically get that up there, and then get the valve as open as it can be right up until the mushroom head hits the bottom of that. If you go to prying on it, trying to pull the valve out, then all it's going to do is split that valve guide and break it off, and now you've got to go chase that down. So don't do that, and get it as high as it can. And then I don't have any that I have open like that, but then the idea is to take something like a bent chisel and work it around the edge of the valve and get down there to where it hits the valve guide itself. And like I said, I should have started this video whenever I worked on this other one, but I mean, just imagine this thing being all the way up, and then you work this down in there, and then hit it with the sledge. You just want to make sure that, you know, your force of your impact is going to the top of the valve guide and not into the valve, certainly not into the block. So you can see, let me get one that's not broken. You can maybe see some of the chisel impacts on that as I was driving it down. So once you drive that down enough, you can get a pair of vice grips or something on these little tabs on these retainers and pull those out. And I've noticed that if you put the vice grips on there first and then
hammer down on the valve guide, then as soon as it's loose, the retainer clip, just from the weight of the vice grips on it, will just fall out. So once that is done, there's a couple of ways to go about this. Of course, the factory recommended way is to use the tool and drive up the entire assembly with the valve guide and valve and everything off the top. That doesn't always work. We don't have the tool. A lot of times, you can have all this force with the impact on the chisel to drive it down in there, but then it takes a lot to come back up. One way that I tried with this one is to wedge a piece of brass or aluminum or something in there, something that's not going to damage anything, and then just use the camshaft to push the valve and valve seat and everything up. Of course, you run the risk of breaking the valve guide if you do that, which again, I mean, I don't think that'll be a problem. I think these can be replaced. Anyway, that's one way of doing it. Depending on how broken it is, if you have broken them, then of course you can just use a chisel and just drive it all down in there, which is what I had to do on some of these. Yeah, you're not going to be able to, oops. See, I mean, this is the entire valve guide that's not broken, so there's no way to drive it down in there unless the bottom of it is broken off. So again, you want to push that up, use a camshaft, use something with some leverage action. I think on one of these, I used the fork tool as a claw hammer with the top of the valve. Of course, I bent the valve and eventually broke it, but I did get the guide and everything out of the block. So yeah, I mean, I'm not really seeing a way to do this without sacrificing the valves, the springs, the valve guides. Of course, all of that can be replaced. Generally, the block can't. I mean, if the block's busted, why are you doing this in the first place? Try not to damage the seats, which I may have already done, but I think we can probably clean those up. But yeah, like I said, the V8 cousin of this also has these split valve guides. In its earlier years, everybody hates them. Any video I see, they're replacing them with the ones that are single and not split. I guess they have less problems with those. And this is a Ford 1946 Ford G Series. I think it's a 221 or 223 cubic inch engine. It was I think it was on the cheap version of stuff. But I mean, the V8 made 100 horsepower. This makes 90. So what is wrong with this picture? Exactly why would both valves, intake and exhaust, be open at the same time? Looks like both of those lifters are up. Let's see if we can bang on this with the end of a hammer and oh wait, so that one was stuck. Well, now we know why that cylinder didn't work. All right, well, I think I'm going to end the video right about here. This has gotten pretty long already. We've covered a lot of ground on this truck and at least figured out why one of the cylinders wasn't working at all. But anyway, we'll pick up where we left off here on the next video about this truck. But anyway, thanks for watching, and be sure and like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.